Hello. I am a woman in my 60s living in Los Angeles. I am a single mother, living alone with my son. Before my son's first birthday, my husband and I got divorced. The reason for my divorce was my husband's extramarital affairs. My husband had several women as his common-law wives. He just enjoyed himself with those women, but had no idea how difficult it was to raise a child alone as a woman. Moreover, my family was very conservative and frowned upon me for divorcing my husband for his infidelity, rather than enduring it. They said all things would pass if I were patient and waited. As a result, I ended up breaking ties with my parents. That's how I ended up raising my son alone. However, it wasn't that I had to start all over again from the bottom. I had an apartment that I received as alimony, and another one from my parents as a wedding gift. First, I sold my apartment, rented a small one, and started studying real estate. We lived off the money from selling the apartment. I couldn't socialize because my son was too young. I studied while caring for my baby, and passed the real estate agent exam within a year. I opened a real estate office. That was 30 years ago. Currently, I own 5 buildings. One of the most profitable buildings is fully leased out to medical offices such as pediatrics, internal medicine, plastic surgery, and more. The other buildings are also fully leased without any vacancies. For the past 30 years, I have faced many struggles. Fortunately, my partner, who had connections in the real estate industry, combined with my good business acumen, has led to greatly successful real estate investments. Now, I do not operate a real estate office, but I'm resting at home and working out. When you hear me up to this point, you might think I am sharing this story just to brag about my good fortune, but that is not the case. Currently, I have a big concern because of my one and only son. Whenever I think of my son, I can't help but sigh. My son is in his late 30s. He went to a 4-year university, but even after he graduated, he did not seek to find a job like everyone else. No matter what he started, it didn't last more than a year. Every time I had a serious fight with my son about it. However, what parent wins over their child? I always gave in, telling myself I should just be grateful that he's healthy. Even though my son is getting older, he still hangs out with younger friends. It seems like he doesn't realize he's aging. One day, my son suddenly said he wanted to start a business. I wondered if he had finally come to his senses. With some anticipation, I asked him what kind of business he wanted to open. I want to open a pub that sells alcohol, coffee, wine, and pizza. A pub with a nice atmosphere. These days, young people in their 20s like those kinds of places. Anyway, I want to open a trendy spot. If it sells alcohol, it should just sell alcohol. But why sell coffee and pizza together? My son said, "Mom, you're too old-fashioned. You know nothing about current trends. These days, you can't just sell one thing. A diverse menu is the trend." I didn't quite understand what he was talking about. But since it had been a while since my son showed interest in anything, I gave him the money for his business. Plus, my son was very stubborn and wouldn't give up when he was fixated on something. So that's how he prepared for his pub. On the day of the opening ceremony, he invited me. I had nothing to say since young people these days like that kind of store, but I didn't like it. Even though a lot of money was spent on the interior, the walls were plastered with cement and bricks. The lighting was dim inside. I wondered why so much money was spent on such a simple interior design. My son said, "Mom, it's trendy these days. You'll see." Contrary to my worries, his pub seemed to be doing well. It seemed like this business suited him, and he worked hard at it. Of course, my son had dated a lot of girls, but this time he seemed serious with her. Sure enough, it wasn't long before he told me he had someone to introduce to me. "Mom, this is the one who will become your daughter-in-law," he said. It's my first time meeting someone who feels like my soulmate, like fate. I couldn't help but think, what the heck? Every girl you meet, you claim she's your fate. Curious, I asked, "What does she do?" My son told me that his girlfriend was a flight attendant. I asked him how they met, and he said she came to his pub and was a regular. He also mentioned that she was very pretty. I suggested that we all go out to eat together, so I could meet her. Since it was just a casual meeting and not a formal one to plan a wedding or anything, I was going to choose a restaurant popular with young people. However, my son insisted on making a reservation at a very expensive place. I thought it was a bit excessive, but I relented. Mom, my Stella only eats organic food, my son informed me. I couldn't help but wonder if she came from a wealthy family, so I made a reservation at a good Japanese restaurant. My expectations were raised somewhat as my son had been raving about his girlfriend. However, I was in for a disappointment. He brought a girl who was terminally ill with narcissism of the worst kind. She treated my son like her servant, and it was clear that their relationship was more of a master and slave dynamic. She couldn't have cared less that I was there. My stomach churned as I watched my precious son try to please this mannerless, self-centered girl. I didn't raise him to end up like that. But despite all this, my son was all smiles. He continued to blabber, complimenting his girlfriend and saying she was pretty and kind. Only time will tell if she truly is kind, but I have to admit she was very pretty. I could see why my son was head over heels for her. Out of all the girls he had introduced to, she was the one who stood out the most. These days, girls seem to not age due to close skincare management. She was the same age as my son, but she looked much younger. Considering that she was a flight attendant for a major airline, her capabilities didn't seem bad at all. To be a flight attendant, one must be proficient in foreign languages and presentable. However, Stella did not seem to enjoy Japanese cuisine and barely ate, even putting down her chopsticks. This is considered impolite in front of elders. My initial impression of her was not favorable. Since they were not engaged, I let it go. Little did I know that she would become my daughter-in-law. If I had known, I would have done everything in my power to oppose their relationship. I regretted my easygoing attitude. Even after returning home, my son continued to praise his girlfriend, asking me if she was even prettier than he had described. However, she does not have a big appetite. It's not like she's a bird. Mom, what kind of era is this? My Stella said that, in order to be superior to others, one must first change their eating habits. You keep referring to her as my Stella so much. Why don't you marry a girl with a more well-rounded personality for marriage? Mom, what are you saying? I plan to marry Stella no matter what. My son suddenly yelled at me, leaving me stunned. When I suggested getting to know her better before deciding on marriage, my son said that if he didn't marry her right away, someone else would snatch her away, and seemed anxious. He had even proposed to her already. He had bought a large diamond ring with a loan from the bank and money from his pub. As soon as I heard this, my head started to ache. Despite being my son, he was pathetic. Why are you telling me this now? You even took out a bank loan for the ring just to propose to her? Stella's friends all had luxury brand wedding diamonds, so why couldn't I save my future wife's face? Do you even know what you're talking about? It's ridiculous. That girl may be pretty, but her background is not impressive enough for someone to snatch her away. And besides, Stella is in her late 30s, the same age as my son. Her fingers, with what money are you planning to get married? Of course you need to help me. It's your one and only son's wedding. Even though he was my son, he made me angry by assuming my money was already his to spend. I blew up at him out of disappointment. Usually, I wasn't the type to get angry with my son, and my son was also the type to get along with me well. However, this time my son's reaction was different. As soon as I objected to his marriage, my son stopped eating, as a protest. He only stayed in his room playing sad songs all day long. After a week, I couldn't let it go on. My son's face was half the size and he had lost a lot of weight. I had heard of love sickness, but it was the first time I witnessed it. I became scared that I might lose my son this way. In the end, I had no choice but to raise the white flag of defeat. That's how I ended up meeting with Stella's parents. I'm not a biased person, but I felt something wasn't right. The people who were going to be my in-laws didn't seem ordinary, even on the outside. My son's father-in-law was over 60 years old, but he wore a pink-colored suit with matching pink shoes and sunglasses. Fortunately, his mother-in-law seemed normal. She was gentle, quiet, and cultured. We have no savings. As you can see, my daughter is very beautiful. Because she is a stewardess, many wealthy men lined up for her, but she refused them all. So your son is a very lucky guy. What they were saying was that since they had no money, We should bear all the wedding expenses, including the newlyweds' home and furniture. They were insinuating that since their daughter was beautiful, they did not need any money. It was my first time meeting such brash people like them. Since I came with no expectations, I simply said yes. As my son decided to marry, I felt it was in vain to haggle over it. I resigned myself to trying to adjust as we lived together. However, my daughter-in-law was very picky. She never let anything pass when dealing with me, always nitpicking over every single thing. I am not the type to spend a lot of money on weddings. Of course, it's not that I am stingy and won't spend money when it is necessary, but I don't like to be extravagant by spending needlessly on luxury brands. It was the same for my son's wedding. It would only last for a day, so I felt it was sufficient to choose an affordable wedding hall that would still maintain our dignity. However, my daughter-in-law had a different opinion. Mom Stella is very upset and crying. She says she won't marry me. All her friends had their weddings at a 5-star hotel, but how could she have hers at a hall down the road? She said she would rather die than have her wedding there. When the idea of a hotel wedding came up, I couldn't help but laugh. Those hotels were only for the wealthy. How could she expect that when she wasn't paying a cent for the wedding? I asked my son to bring Stella to me first. Stella, what do you mean you won't have your wedding unless it's at a 5-star hotel? It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. It's better not to do it at all, if it would be embarrassing. I couldn't get through to her. My son was devastated when she announced that she didn't want to get married. He declared that he would have the wedding at a hotel and get a loan by using his pub as collateral. As I said, what parent could win against their children? Once again, I had to give in to my son. After making the reservation at the hotel wedding hall, the only thing left was to get her wedding dress. My daughter-in-law said she would get her wedding photos from Bali. She said she had compromised for a less expensive Bali photo shoot when her friends took their wedding photos in Hawaii. Since I was forced to pay for the expensive hotel wedding, I showed my displeasure. Then my daughter-in-law seemed to have noticed and changed it from Bali to Catalina Island near Los Angeles. Finally, my son had his dream wedding at a hotel. As my daughter-in-law claimed, the hotel wedding was perfect. People around me envied us. It was truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. So it was right to do it grandly. My son and his bride started their newlywed in a new condominium that I had bought for an investment. At that time, I promised my daughter-in-law one thing. Stella, I have no preference whether it's a girl or a boy. But when you give birth, I'll give you a commercial building I have downtown. It was a condition I put up because I wanted to see my grandchild before I became too old. My son would inherit my buildings anyway, so if my daughter-in-law would have a baby right away, I had planned on giving it earlier. My daughter-in-law had said she wanted many children, so my expectations were high. However, I didn't know she would stab me in the back like this. Mom, please give me $100,000 so we can have our grandchild as soon as possible. What nonsense are you talking about? My son told me that his wife will get a surrogate girl from Singapore because she didn't want to ruin her body due to pregnancy. She told him it could be done with $100,000. Among her friends, many had children using that method. I wondered what kind of friends she had to do such an unbelievable act. There's nothing wrong with you guys, so why would a stranger carry your child? I won't give you a cent if you plan to have your baby that way. My son became despondent upon hearing my words and left. Then my son called me crying in the middle of the night. He said his wife left him after he told her what I had said. I was dumbfounded. How could she pout when she was the one who said such nonsense? At that time, I thought my daughter-in-law would return soon. However, Stella's absence got much longer than expected. She seemed to be staying at her parents' house. My son went to her, cried, and begged her to return home, but she was adamant. After 3 months, she finally returned. In the meantime, my son blamed me, causing me a lot of strife. For a while, I spent some peaceful time, as my son and his wife seemed to be getting along well. One day, my son and his wife came to visit me looking very cheerful. "We have good news for you, Mother. Our Stella is pregnant." I couldn't help but shed tears at the news of her pregnancy that I had been waiting for. She said some nonsense before, but I was relieved that was behind us. I told my daughter-in-law to say anything she wanted. Then for some reason she declined. No, mother, it's okay. Thank you for saying that. When she refused, I wanted to buy her even more. Therefore, I called my daughter-in-law from a foreign car dealer the next day. I bought a foreign car that she wanted without any regard to its price. Then I hired a housekeeper for her and fed her with all kinds of delicacies from around the country that claimed to be good for her health. As the labor date neared, I was curious about the sex of my grandchild. When she and I went to the obstetrician, he indirectly told us, "I think the baby will be good at playing soccer." Although I had said I didn't care, I felt happy when I heard it was a boy. However, from that day on, my daughter-in-law hinted at me, "Mother, do you remember that building you said you would give to me? When will that be?" I'm not a person who says one thing and does another. I said I would give it to her, so of course I will. I had planned on giving that building to her to be jointly owned with her baby. Well, you could just give it to me in my name. Well, it's not urgent. When the baby is born and his birth certificate is issued, I'll give it to you on that date. My daughter-in-law's face changed strangely at my words. Looking at her, I got a strange feeling. A few days later, my daughter-in-law asked me the same thing. She said, "If you're gonna give it to me, why not give it to me now?" She seemed too anxious. As she said, it wouldn't matter to give it to her earlier. However, there's such a thing as one's sixth sense, right? Somehow I felt something ominous. My biggest suspicion was about her disappearance for 3 months. After that incident, she acted like a different person. I thought that she had finally matured. But considering the history of my daughter-in-law, it was a no-brainer. As a result, I hired a private investigator to find out what had happened to her. And in the meantime, my daughter-in-law's labor was imminent. I booked the best postpartum care center. My daughter-in-law was hospitalized in advance for the most optimum delivery. When my daughter-in-law went into the delivery room to give birth, I sat in the waiting room, looking at the watch. At that time, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. It was the private investigator. "Madam, there's something you need to see. I'll send you a picture, so check it out." Just as I was about to check my phone, a nurse came out of the operating room. She said that my daughter-in-law gave birth smoothly and I had a healthy grandson. My son and I hugged each other happily. Then my daughter-in-law was moved to a room. "Good work. You did a really great job. Let's live better together with the baby in the future." I held my daughter-in-law's hand tightly and shed tears. Giving birth is not easy. Besides, she was in her late 30s, so it's even worse. My son and I went to the newborn unit. Through the window, the nurse showed us our grandson. But something was strange. The baby was cute, but he didn't look like a Korean boy. But, of course, the skin color was the same as mine. Something definitely was odd, though. "Mom, doesn't our baby look so pretty as he takes after my wife?" My son said excitedly, "I want him to become a movie star when he grows up." At that time, the baby opened one eye slightly. I was in shock when I saw that the baby's eye color was blue. I wasn't mistaken. My son had also seen it with his own 2 eyes. "Brett, why are his eyes like that?" I asked. "It's bright blue, as if he has colored lenses." At that moment, I remembered the call from the private investigator. I quickly opened my phone and checked. Oh my God, no words came out. The photo sent by the PI showed a white man with blue eyes hugging and kissing my daughter-in-law. It wasn't a recent photo, but the private investigator somehow got hold of a photo of her on the internet. I found out that the relationship between those two was quite serious. When she was seeing my son, their relationship was not over. During the 3 months of her absence, her photos showed up on that guy's social media. It seemed like they were having a party, just the 2 of them, in a hotel room. The PI said that it was very difficult to obtain that photo. I then realized why she wanted to get the building so quickly. I took my son to a nearby cafe and showed him all the photos I received from the private investigator. It couldn't be true. Stella is such a nice girl. At first, my son was confused, but he soon accepted the truth. He himself thought that the baby his wife gave birth to belonged to someone with blue eyes. However, since we are of Korean descent, blue eyes were out of the question. I told him that since Stella just had a baby, he should end things with her when she gets out of the hospital. My son was in tears saying, "Mom, I love her too much." I asked him, "Are you going to raise someone else's baby?" He replied, "I could if he was Korean, but he's Caucasian." That's not all. Their relationship is not over. She may run away after getting my building. I asked my son, "Do you still want Stella?" Only then did my son concede. I immediately went to see an attorney that I was acquainted with and asked for advice in this situation. Then I came home only to collapse. My daughter-in-law didn't even call, knowing that she had been found out. I thought my son would divorce her, but instead, my daughter-in-law came over with my son when she got discharged from the hospital. She came to see me with my son at her side and said, "Mother, why aren't you giving me the building you promised?" I was shocked and replied, "What? Are you crazy now?" She continued, "It's not enough even if you got down on your knees to beg for forgiveness. Yet what nerve you have. My daughter-in-law then threatened, 'Mother, if you don't keep your promise, I will have to sue you for fraud.'" I was speechless at her audacity. However, she thought I was scared when she saw me like that. "Mother, you said, if I gave birth to a son, you would give me the building." Honey, you heard that too, right? My son, like a sucker of the century, nodded his head. I never imagined that my own son, whom I had raised over 30 years, would betray me like this. At that moment, all my affection for him seemed to be erased. "Is that baby Brett? You had someone else's baby, yet how dare you demand? What does it matter? These days many people adopt even. Also, my husband told me he would raise my baby as his son. Isn't that right, honey?" I couldn't take it any longer and called the lawyer. Soon my lawyer arrived at the house. Then, I told my son and his wife that I would not give them anything as their inheritance. "From now on, you are no longer my son. I will not give you even 1 penny. I will spend all my money before I die. Should there be any assets left, I plan to donate to a non-profit organization. So I don't want to see you any longer." They were silent at my words. Then finally, they came to their senses and kneeled, begging for my forgiveness. But that didn't change my mind. I screamed that if they didn't leave immediately, I would call the police. In the end, I cut ties with my son and his wife. Since then, my son and his wife came by my house several times knocking on my door, but I never opened it. I no longer wanted to see my son. He threw away his life because he fell for that kind of girl. He never even considered his own mother. How hard I struggled to raise him. These days, I'm living alone. I am even being extravagant on myself. Now that I don't have anyone to leave my money to, I don't know why I struggled so hard to save money. I was able to hear some news about my son and his wife. My daughter-in-law used to be a high spender, being overindulgent, but when I stopped giving money to my son, she overextended herself using credit cards. Because of that, they lost their condominium and had to move to a tiny studio. In the basement, they are now living in the house with Stella's parents. However, he has not divorced her yet. My heart aches whenever I think about my son raising someone's baby. However, I now attribute it to my son's own choice. He only pursued girls who are pretty, so he deserves what he got. After some time, if my son finally wakes up and repents, then I will reconsider. After all, mother and son have an unbreakable bond. Those of you who have successfully raised your children are amazing. Thank you for listening to my story. Please show your support and share your words of wisdom in the comment section. Liking and subscribing would be a great help to me. Have a wonderful day.